millions of Jews back in Israel, Jerusalem rebuilt, Hebrew revived, the land flourishing again. Pinch yourself, this is happening. And the entire world is obsessed with this tiny strip of land. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Aaron Sokol and you're watching Parsha Inspired. Not only are we at the end of times, we are halfway through. In this video, we're going to take a look at Daniel, Ezekiel, Zechariah, Isaiah, and show how these prophecies are being fulfilled in our time. And finally, we're going to show what happens next. So, let's dive in. Something feels wrong with the world. Right now, history itself feels accelerated, like humanity crossed into a completely different era, almost overnight. And according to ancient Jewish prophecy, that might not be accidental. Because everybody thinks redemption arrives in a single supernatural moment. One day the world is normal, and the next day Mashiach arrives. Fire in the sky, open miracles, a sudden divine intervention that changes everything overnight. But that's not actually how the prophets describe it. What if the Messianic era does not begin with crazy supernatural events and the suspension of nature, but rather through history itself? What if redemption doesn't interrupt history? What if redemption is history? Because according to many, many Jewish sources, the redemption does not come all at once. It unfolds gradually and naturally. Think about it. Think about how radical that idea is, because it means redemption may unfold through wars, through politics, technology, global instability, social upheaval, and the return of the Jewish people to this land. Meaning, people living through the process may not recognize it while it's happening. Therefore, the Talmud describes two possible paths. The prophet Daniel says, redemption comes with the clouds of heaven. But Zechariah says he comes riding on a donkey as a humble person. So which one is it? Is Zechariah right? Why the contradiction? Now, the Talmud explains that if Israel, the Jewish people, are worthy, the Messiah comes with the clouds of heaven, and if not, humble and riding upon a donkey. Meaning, if humanity merits it, redemption comes openly and miraculously. If not, history itself slowly transforms into redemption. And honestly, doesn't the modern era and the modern world suddenly feel strange? Doesn't it feel like history itself accelerated? Like humanity crossed into a completely different era almost overnight? Because for thousands of years, human civilizations barely changed. Empires rose and fell, but human life remained fundamentally minimal. Then, suddenly, everything exploded. Electricity, the Industrial Revolution, telephones, earphones, radio, television, computers, internet, AI. Be honest, doesn't it feel like the world changed more in the last 20 years than previous centuries? All the previous centuries combined. And nearly 2,000 years ago, the Zohar appeared to predict this exact acceleration. The Zohar states, in the 600th year of the 6th millennium, the gates of wisdom on high and the well springs of lower wisdom will be opened. This will prepare the world to enter into the 7th millennium. The Jewish year that the Zohar refers to is 5600, 1840, right before the technological revolution exploded. Now think about how insane that is. For nearly all of history, humanity progressed slowly. Then, suddenly, knowledge bursts open everywhere, exactly as the Zohar described. And the Jewish sources connect this explosion of knowledge to preparation for the Messianic era. Therefore, the most frightening prophecy of all is this one. The sages describe the generation before Mashiach as a generation possessing the power to destroy itself. Think about that carefully. The power to destroy itself. For almost all human history, that was impossible. Only now. Nuclear weapons, biological engineering, artificial intelligence, autonomous warfare, all these things are new inventions. For the first time ever, humanity possesses near godlike technology power without godlike morality. Humanity became powerful faster than it became wise. And deep down, people feel this instability. People sense something about modern civilization that feels unnatural, like history itself is accelerating towards something enormous. But technology wasn't the only sign. The prophets also describe a generation where society itself begins breaking apart. The sages describe a time when parents and children will grow up in two entirely different worlds. Tradition would weaken. The old would seek favor from the young. And truth itself would collapse. And honestly, has there ever been a generation where parents and children lived in more completely different realities than now? The prophet Isaiah says, truth will fall. Now, look around. Humanity has more information than ever before. Yet, people no longer know what truth even is. Everyone has opinions. No one has certainty. People are more connected than ever. Yet people are more lonely than ever. Humanity looks technologically advanced, but spiritually completely overwhelmed. And maybe, perhaps maybe, the most frightening part of this is the following. The prophet Daniel says, "Many will purify themselves and be refined, but the wicked will do evil. Not one of them will understand. Only the wise will understand." Meaning, the confusion itself becomes part of the test. And maybe that's why the world feels psychologically exhausted right now. Because humanity is trying to spiritually survive an age of constant acceleration. But now, this is where things become even more unsettling. The prophet Ezekiel describes a future conflict involving Persia, modern-day Iran, Ezekiel 38. And here's what makes this extraordinary. When Ezekiel gave this prophecy, Persia was actually kind to the Jewish people. They were friends of the Jewish people. Cyrus of Persia actually helped facilitate the Jewish return after Golos Bavel, after the Babylonian exile. Meaning, at the time of this nevuah, this prophecy was written, the idea of Persia, Paras, becoming one of Israel's central enemies would have seemed absurd. Yet, thousands of years later, Iran becomes one of the leading forces threatening Israel's very existence. And according to Ezekiel, this happens after the Jewish people return to the land, after Israel is rebuilt, after the land flourishes again. Va'anpechem titein pri. The prophet Ezekiel says, O mountains of Israel, let your branches sprout forth, yield your fruit to my people Israel, for they are at hand to come. Think about what previous generations would say if they saw today. Like, go back in a time machine, look at today. Millions of Jews back in Israel, Jerusalem rebuilt, Hebrew revived, the land flourishing again. Pinch yourself, this is happening. And the entire world is obsessed with this tiny strip of land. Think about how irrational that is. It's crazy. It makes no sense. Tiny Israel becomes the emotional center and the pulse of world politics. Jerusalem becomes the obsession of nations, universities, protests, governments, media, all Israel, exactly as the prophets described. The psalmist writes, God is rebuilding Jerusalem, then he will gather the dispersed of Israel. Now, does this prove with certainty that we are in Gog uMagog? No. And we should be careful not to force prophecy into headlines. But the parallels are becoming difficult to ignore, especially because for the first time in history, the entire world can watch global events unfold instantly. Humanity watches history happen live in real time. Exactly the kind of world previous generations could never have imagined. And maybe, just maybe, this is the biggest mistake people make. Maybe people waiting for redemption to interrupt history, when perhaps redemption is history, a process, a transition, a civilization moving from one stage of history into perfection. Because the Messianic era is not fundamentally about destruction. It's rather about the transformation. The prophet Isaiah says, nations will not lift up sword against each other, neither will they practice warfare anymore. And the earth will be full of the knowledge of God, as the water covers the sea. The goal of redemption is not the destruction of humanity, it's the elevation of humanity, a world where truth becomes clear again, a world where humanity stops worshiping power, ego, money, violence, and begins pursuing something much, much higher. And maybe that's why this era feels so intense, because humanity is being forced to choose what it believes, what truth is, what morality is, what kind of world it wants to build. And maybe all of this instability is not random. Maybe it's transition. Perhaps it's birth pangs. Maybe civilization itself is moving forward towards something entirely new. Now, does this prove with certainty that we are inside the Messianic process? I think so. I think that we are not only in the middle of the Messianic process, we're halfway through. Now, of course, we are warned not to obsess over the exact timeliness, as the sages taught that we should not calculate the end of times. But the parallels that we are seeing are impossible to ignore. And we are required, as part of our faith, to look at what is happening, the return of Israel to the land, Jerusalem becoming the central point of world history, the technology exploding, Iran rising against Israel, and the collapse of truth and moral clarity. and humanity feeling like history itself is accelerating towards something enormous. Maybe, just maybe, future generations will look back at this exact era that we're in right now and realize this was the transition. This was the turning point. This was the moment the world quietly began changing forever. And maybe, perhaps, the process has already begun. Thank you for watching. Shavua Tov. Please comment. I'll try to read all the comments. Shalom from just outside Jerusalem.